They're all great.
Mushrooms.
All right, welcome everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for another wonderful installment of our Fashioning Sustainability series here on the program on the environment at the University of Washington. My name is Sean McDonald and I'm one half of your hosting duo for today. My other half, Eli, would you like to say hello?
Hello. I really do feel like it's such a generous thing to call me half of what goes on here. I really feel like it's more like, 3/4, 1/4. But I'm so glad you all are here. And I'm super looking forward to Ava. And also, congratulations on making it all the way to week 10, everyone.
I love your enthusiasm, Eli. So everyone, if you're joining us for the first time today, this series is focused on issues of sustainability in fashion, apparel, and textiles. We spent the whole quarter talking about these issues from start to finish, the circular economy, starting from soils really, and working all the way through a whole host of issues. We are very lucky, fortunate today to be speaking with Ava Holmes, founder of Fashion for Conservation. Ava is also, full disclosure, an alumni of our program, so it's great to have her back to speak with us today. The title of today's installment is Fashion as a Vehicle for Advocacy and Conservation, and so we thought bringing Ava back to talk about her experience and her efforts would be extremely useful for that, and to kind of close out the quarter with this very different topic. But before we get into that, I do want to start with our land acknowledgement. I'd like to begin by saying that the University of Washington acknowledges the Coast Salish peoples of this land, the land which touches the shared waters of all tribes and bands within the Suquamish, Tulalip, and Muckleshoot nations. And while we meet today on this virtual platform here on Zoom, some of us coming from as far away as Peru, I think you're our farthest guest today, to date at least. We want to take a moment to acknowledge the importance of the lands which we each call home wherever we are. We do this to reaffirm our commitment and responsibility to improving relationships between nations and to improving our own understanding of local indigenous peoples and their cultures and the protection of the land. So with that, I welcome you all to this installment of our seminar, and I welcome Ava as well. I want to just give everyone just a tiny bit of background on you, Ava, before we jump in with your remarks. So Ava Jordan Holmes believes bridging the gap between the industries of conservation and fashion is a key to human survival. Ava founded Fashion for Conservation to combine her formerly distinct interests as a producer for Fashion Weeks Worldwide, board member at various wildlife conservation organizations, and most recently reality TV show Wilderness Survivalist at Discovery Channel. Since founding the movement in 2012 during her time as an undergraduate at UW, her dynamic team of industry-leading fashion peers and colleagues in conservation have been working hard to grow the movement by producing wildlife-inspired fashion campaigns and hosting events in the US, BC, Spain, and UK. Most recently exhibiting their campaign to help protect African elephants, Elephantasia, during London Fashion Week. I think that was in September of 2019. Is that right, Ava? Ava will provide her perspective on the role of fashion in promoting environmental awareness and conservation. And we're so happy to have her with us. Let's give her a big round of applause, everyone. Thank you so much for being with us. All right. And so just like every other one of our installments of this series, we are going to open it up to comments from you, Ava, to start us off. And then I would greatly appreciate the students asking their questions, because I think that that's an important part of this conversation. And so, as always, students, if you have a question for Ava, turn on your microphone and you can either speak up or you can raise your little digital hand and we'll call on you. But we do want to keep the questions moving along. And make this a great conversation space for all of us. If you are joining us on YouTube, you can go ahead and chat us your questions. Just insert those in the chat and we'll be sure to ask them as well. All right. Ava, let's turn it over to you. Hello.
Hi, Sean. First of all, it's so nice to see all of you. Time has a funny way of going. When you do something so different in your life, it feels like so much time has gone by since I was at University of Washington, but it also feels like yesterday. It feels like you're talking to me as a student, but it also, even when I was a student, I was doing presentations in other classes about fashion bird conservation. So I feel just like one of you guys, and I can't wait to meet you guys through questions. If you have any, please ask. Yeah, my name is Ava. I don't know if I'm trying to figure out the lighting here, so I've been moving around. So let me know if you can't hear or see me.
Yeah.
Yeah, so during my time at University of Washington, I was also working in fashion. At first, it was just a job, so I was doing a lot of behind the scenes at different exhibitions, both runway and showroom between New York. And then that sort of led me into working in Europe for the different fashion weeks there. And sometimes I would even take a quarter off or a semester off from University of Washington to go and do those jobs. And it became very intense. It became sort of like a full-time career, right? Before I was even graduated. But because I was in the College of Environment, because I grew up in nature, which I'll talk a bit more about later, my background before going to fashion. No problem. Yeah. Oh, no problem.
No problem.
Yeah, I could see a lot of things about the industry that didn't sit well with me for my personal morals, but also because I know that fashion industry leads the voice of the world. Anything that happens in fashion is what you see in media, and it trickles down to people who think they don't care about fashion or think that fashion is not relevant to them. But really, it's the leading voice in our entire world. If you have a lot of power or presence in fashion, that's arguably more influential than politics, because it's a lot more simple system. It's kind of a black and white. You're either on the top, you're a celebrity, you're a voice, or you're not. And it really does have a huge influence in the way that our world turns, our society turns. So I could see that, and I wasn't okay with a lot of things. I would love to hear from you guys what you know about the fashion industry, but the main thing is that it's the second most wasteful industry on the planet, both from the production of the clothing, but also the waste of clothing, and also the waste of the events themselves. And the production of clothing is most polluting in three ways. One is the scraps. So when they make clothing, the scraps of the clothing are almost equal to the mass of the clothing itself that gets produced. The dyes in clothing, and of course the shipping in clothing is the part that the production is very, very harmful, as well as some of the materials that are used. Cotton is considered a sustainable material, but it's actually a very, very thirsty material. It consumes more water than any other crop on the planet. And of course, then there's plastic materials. I mean, it's a very, very complicated question is what is a sustainable textile? But the point is the majority of the clothes we wear are not sustainable. And then there's the waste element, which is the average American wastes anywhere from 60 to 90 pounds of clothing every single year is the average, which is an immense amount of waste in fashion. So yeah, I knew that statistic, and I wanted to do something about that. So I started being interested in working with designers who were doing things differently, who are taking materials outside of the box, reusing things in different ways. I got very involved with my friend's project called Eco Fashion Week, which was in Vancouver. And then eventually I started doing my own events, still during my time at University of Washington. In 2012, we started doing these. Where we would host big galas or events that were all surrounding fashion inspired by nature. So we did a runway campaign every single year. Sorry, I'll explain what that was about in a second. And all the fashions featured on the runway were inspired by the rainforest, and all the funds from that event would go to the rainforest. We started doing that a lot. As Sean mentioned, we did one about African elephants in Paris and in Spain and in London and New York. And we did one about amphibians. We did quite a few campaigns. That's how Fashion for Conservation began. And from our little events at University of Washington, we took the brand to be, an international presence on Fashion Week stages and galas and different parts of the world. And the last one we did before the pandemic was at the Natural History Museum in London, and we raised 1.4 million pounds for conservation projects with the Whitley Fund for Nature through a fashion show. So that was awesome, and it was in a really beautiful setting. And we worked with some really incredible designers for that. And that was kind of our last hurrah before the pandemic hit. We've been doing a little bit here and there virtually, but mostly we've kind of been on pause since the pandemic. And that's just a very quick background of what Fashion for Conservation is all about, and why I decided to start Fashion for Conservation. Yeah, my background and why nature interests me is another story, but that's a summary of what Fashion for Conservation is about. Mm-hmm. And I would love to hear from any of you questions, as well as my original inquiry, which is, what do you know about the fashion industry and its impact environmentally? And any of those. I have another question I'll ask you later.
Wait, Ava, do you know? Because I don't know, and I want to know. You said the fashion industry is the second most polluting industry, but I don't know what the first most polluting industry is.
Guesses?
Well, we've been guessing. We've been guessing. Oil, food systems,
petroleum,
oil. Uh-huh. And the third is, I'm not sure right now, but I'm pretty sure the third is food systems still. Mm-hmm.
It's all Eli's fault. Anyway, well, thank you so much, Ava, for giving us that overview, Fashion for Conservation, how you got started. I think it's always nice, I think, for the students to get a sense for where our guests started from. I think that we actually asked the students some questions in advance, and I think Eli has some of those, but I would strongly encourage students to ask questions directly of our guest if they'd like. We would really appreciate that. And I'm sure she would as well. So if you have questions, please feel free to let us know. You can ask those questions.
From Eli. Oh, Eli says something else. As Ashley, Isabel, Ali, Sarah, Rebecca, any of you have questions? Rachel, Alana, Nicholas, the oranges, Hannah, Hayden, Riley. Oh, such beautiful photos. It's true. Maddie, Olivia. Yeah, I mean, I guess I could just, until anyone has questions, I guess I could just say, in general, that fashion and the environment is something that a lot of people think that they're not a part of, right? So they don't think they're part of fashion because they're not interested in it, or they don't think they're, interested in the environment, so they're not thinking about it. But the truth is that when sustainable fashion is trendy, it also influences everyone. So it's really important that if you are interested in the environment, or if you are interested in fashion, to try to share and push these trends that makes it so that even people who are interested in these themes start to follow it, right? So people are all of a sudden going back to secondhand and going back to using sustainable materials and even sustainable lifestyle products just because it's trendy. And when that is no longer a trend is when it gets difficult again. But right now we're on this really interesting high in the fashion industry of it being a trend to be sustainable, and we're trying to make that last as long as possible because it is helpful.
Yeah, thank you, Ava. Oh, Emma, you have a question for Ava. We'd love to hear from you.
Yeah. Hi, Ava. I was wondering, I know you work runway and all of that. I was wondering what pushback or challenges have you encountered trying to bring sustainability to the runway?
Yeah, thank you. The first one that comes to mind is
You were muted for a second.
So the first one that comes to mind is that fashion goes without saying, it's a very superficial industry. Actually, my biggest challenge was saying there were sustainability, and even there was these huge multi-million-dollar press events where all these celebrities would sit around a table talking about sustainability. And they would say, oh, they're just very, very wishy-washy say, like, eco is sustainable, is organic, is great, is trendy, is popular. And it was this very pointless, circular conversation between people who really had no idea what they were talking about. And that was really frustrating because their voices matter so much when it comes to education. But because fashion industry is such a superficial stage in a lot of ways, it was a huge challenge to get people to say the right things. So it took a lot of meeting behind the scenes, meeting behind closed doors to actually get people to get it and to be able to articulate it in a way that was, that the press wrote the right thing instead of just recording celebrities saying eco fashion is great, but who actually really knows what that means. So that was really, really challenging because, like I said, we would just have these celebrities and these brands in a room just talking and not actually making any difference. So to actually get brands to say, okay, I'm committing to wasting less, or I'm committing to using these different materials, or, working with local production houses instead of working with production houses in China, was a whole different ballgame than just getting them to talk. It was very, very easy to get people to talk because fashion is all about talking and image, but to actually get people to change and to understand was really, really hard. So that was the main pushback that I got.
Yeah, thank you for that. That's actually quite interesting. So students, I would encourage you to continue to ask questions. I think that Eli had highlighted a couple that we had received from students beforehand, and one that I thought was sort of interesting. We think of universities as being incubators for a lot of things, for ideas. I'm wondering, the question from one of the students was, did your time at UW prepare you for opportunities to further this movement? Or I guess, put another way, do you think that that sort of being at a University of Washington in this case, was that a good sort of ground to sort of to start these ideas, to start thinking about this? Did you find a lot of sort of, I suppose, kindred spirits in trying to develop this idea?
Yeah, you mentioned it when you introduced me, that the beginning of this movement was thanks to University of Washington in so many ways. I mean, it goes without saying that being in a university is a huge privilege, huge privilege. And beyond just the fact that there's education and that's the privilege, it's the resources. Like, being at University of Washington provided so many resources to be able to build a brand, whether it's fashion or science or, farming or whatever thing that you have in your heart to pursue after university. Start now, because being in the university, I mean, I don't know if Tony is still around from the resource center in the hub, but like he and I are still such good friends whenever we can connect, because he helped us so much. I mean, there's so many people, let alone resources, at the University of Washington, that allowed me, even if I was working in London or in Paris or whatever, to save so much on cost, to be connected with people in the industry that weren't necessarily like UW alum, but for somebody who knew somebody, always, it's such a good incubator for anything, really. I was so grateful for my time there. And a lot of the interns in the beginning that we worked with were UW students who were just like my friends or my peers that interned with me or with the people that I was working with. And we were lucky enough early on to get a director of Vogue to be our art director. So a lot of people from UW were really excited by the opportunity to work with her. But that came from UW, and it came from being there. So whatever it is that you want to do, UW is such a good opportunity to explore that. It really is. Yeah, I think the biggest resources are the group of alums, the resource center, the teachers there, obviously from having taught so many people, they know a lot of people in the field, and each other. Just, manpower is their woman power, student power is what makes things happen. So yeah, definitely take advantage of the time that you're there.
That's fantastic. Eli, while we're waiting for the students to find their voice, is there another question from the list that you thought was particularly interesting? Oh, you're muted.
Yeah, sorry. I mean, there's so many great questions here. Actually, I'm really enjoying thinking through them.
Well,
But in the meantime, we have had 2 students raise their hands. So before jumping into one, I'm going to read. I'll just look to Jaden. I think you had your hand up first, and then we'll go to Ava Hayes.
thank you so much.
Jaden. Hello. So what do you think is the largest thing that's holding back like a sustainable fashion industry? Is it that there's not a lot of awareness of the issue, or that brands are stubborn and don't want to change their ways, or resources or materials, or what do you think is like the biggest issue right now that's holding it back?
Yeah, I mean, it's such a complex question that it's hard to point the finger in one direction. I guess I could go from a very holistic answer and then kind of tune in on something more specific that's more tangible and workable. The very, very big holistic answer is economy, because people love not spending very much money on something that makes them look and feel good and trendy. I mean, fast fashion is just very attractive, right? Especially in college, you can understand that when something comes out on Instagram and it's really cute and it's perfect for summer, it's perfect for the next picnic, it makes us want it. We want to get the thing that makes us look and feel good that's not very expensive. Unfortunately, fast fashion has been the answer for so long that we don't think beyond, that immediate consumer mentality. And fashion isn't stupid, they spend billions and billions of dollars on marketing that's so tied in with psychology. As humans, we're evolved a certain way, and these marketing institutions study us. They know us so much better than we know ourselves. They know exactly the timing of, how spaced out notifications should be that we get from our phones, the exact pitch of the sound, the colors of the season, the colors that makes us feel different ways. Marketing is so tuned into our psychology that it's very, very hard to escape our own evolution, right? To be able to think outside the box of fast fashion, which is what funds that marketing. So it's kind of a heavy thing to try to think beyond fast fashion, because it's not just economy. It's that, they're so good at what they do of making us want it. I think it really just comes down to anything. It's power to the people. We need the more of us that say, look, these people behind fast fashion are not being paid well enough. They're really suffering. The environment is suffering because of fast fashion. The more that we can give a voice to the environment and give a voice to the people who are not being treated fairly by fast fashion, that's kind of our only hope as with any environmental issue. It's really in the hands of us, in our hands, to be able to do something. So I think the big picture is the big picture is economy. It's just cheap and it's easy. And then to be very, very specific, it's fashion. Within the fashion industry, it's trend. So right now, like I mentioned in the beginning, we're having kind of like a trendy eco-fashion wave where it's like, buying secondhand is trendy, or even big brands are starting to replace toxic materials with organic cotton, things like that, which is great, like step. But the fear is when eco-fashion goes out of trend, it's just going to go back to ground zero. So we just have to fight really hard for this eco fashion to be more permanent, kind of like the organic food movement, which at first was just a trend, and now it's like, you know, a more sustainable lifestyle. People want to buy organic food, they want to buy local food. So we need to push until fashion becomes that same way, where we buy local, buy quality over quantity, or secondhand if we can't afford expensive local things. Yeah, this trend just needs to be grounded in our daily conversations on social media and our actions.
Thank you for that, Ava. That's really interesting. I have a thought, but I'm going to save it because I want to hear from Ava first. Ava, meet Ava.
Hi, Ava.
Nice to see you.
Oh.
Sorry, I got some feedback. Hold on.
Somebody else wants to say hi really quickly. Sorry. Hello.
Hey.
Sorry. And it didn't continue.
Okay, is that better?
Oh yeah, that's better. Thank you.
Okay. I had the same, passion and interest in pineapple leather, like Eli mentioned in the chat, and on the idea of sustainable materials. I wanted to ask, how is pineapple leather as good of a replacement as like faux leather, or of course real leather, but then also, how much does that save in an environmental footprint way? And is there other materials that may be a little bit more unique that you've also used within not even just the Elephantasia collection, but also with some of the other works that you've done these past couple of years?
Yeah. Thank you for that question, because it's a really good one, and I'll explain why. So it's great that the industry is experimenting with alternative materials, period. It's great that they're experimenting with pineapple, with coffee. I mean, there's mushroom leather. It's not just about being vegan, right? It's about actually finding materials that are affordable, producible on a massive scale. That's also ethical. Pineapple leather specifically, we've used in our Elephantasia collections. We like to use innovative materials. However, everything is a conversation. It's not black or white. My issue with pineapple leather specifically is that the reason that in theory it's good is because pineapple is compostable, right? You can adjust over time. The problem with pineapple leather is that in order for it to maintain its form as leather, they need to put so many chemicals on the. Hold on 1 second. Oh, Kim. New member of Fashion for Conservation. They need to put so many chemicals on the pineapple that it almost becomes not compostable. It takes a very long time to compost in the end. So it's a kind of an ironic thing. I think they eventually could get it to the point, like I said, it's a first step to where pineapple leather is a great alternative and it's decomposable, which is the problem right now, is it's actually not, and yet it's kind of like plastic, which is unfortunate. So everything is kind of a question like that, right? Organic cotton too is like, it's much better than regular cotton because you're not using pesticides, but it's still a very thirsty material. So I don't really think anything is black and white, just like no food is black and white. Every diet matches the person. You really have to say, okay, what are my options? What option can I choose that's the best? What's the best option you can choose? So if you choose between recycled leather, for example, like secondhand leather, I personally vote for that over pineapple leather. But if you're going to buy a new leather, then get pineapple leather because it's a lot more sustainable in the production. So nothing is black and white, but pineapple leather is an interesting exploration. There's lots of other alternative materials out there too. I think if you can do research, awesome. If you don't have the time or interest in doing research, then always just stick to the local 3 principles, which is buy local, buy quality over quantity, and if you can, buy secondhand.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Thank you for sharing your perspectives on that. I didn't know anything about pineapple leather beforehand, so that's super cool.
Yeah, it's tricky. It's like everything really is a conversation, just like every diet is questionable. It's really, what are your options and what is the best thing to choose? That you feel that is your best options, accessible to you and your economic situation, your social situation. You know, a lot of our job require that we wear certain things or look a certain way, or our schools require, you know, wearing plastic masks that are disposable. We have so much plastic waste just in that. So can you get a mask that is disposable, you know, or that is, reusable? You know, it's just whatever we can do our best.
For sure. Thank you for that.
So Ava, so it's, you know, it's interesting. We're talking about, you know, different things people can do to be more sustainable in their fashion choices. But one thing that strikes me about the fashion for conservation movement is the idea of using fashion as a platform to advocate, to publicize, and to really call attention to these issues, right? And that's what you've been doing a lot of. I'm curious though, if you found through that process that certain brands, or you know, you don't have to name names obviously, but certain brands or designers who are interested in being associated with this idea of conservation or the environment, but really fundamentally aren't willing to make the changes necessary to actually walk the walk, sort of talking the talk without walking the walk. And is that hard for an organization like Fashion for Conservation to try and walk that path to bring people along,
Right.
and while at the same time trying to avoid those bad actors?
Yeah, thank you. That's such a good question. And that's exactly the balance that we try to make as a team. So there's so many times where we've had sort of this fundraising event and some big sponsors offered us X amount of money to put their name everywhere, but supporting that sponsor would be completely against the brand, right? Like putting Coca-Cola everywhere is like putting a gasoline company basically on a fundraiser to stop, you know, or whatever. It's completely contradictory. So we've always had to ask ourselves, is this an integrity with the brand? Yes or no? And there's some cases that are very borderline. Like for a campaign for Eco Fashion Week, we did decide to work with H&M, even though they're a fast fashion company, because they made a big enough commitment where we felt like it was appropriate to support them, because they're actually taking a big enough step where they actually made an entire collection that was pretty transparent in comparison to any other line that a fast fashion company did that year. They were one of the first fashion companies to do a big campaign of sustainable materials and less waste and transparency to their production supply chain as well. But yeah, we've always had to ask ourselves, is this integrity with our brand, right? And it's funny, you can see which influencers are in integrity with their words on Earth Day, because there's a huge influx of brands that are doing Earth Day campaign, and they'll reach out to sustainable influencers, paying them to talk about them. And yeah, I mentioned in the beginning that one of the biggest challenges was having big brands or celebrities be part of the eco-fashion conversation, not know at all what they were talking about or really care. They just wanted to be part of the trend. So I think it's always a balance. But I think the most important piece of that question is that Fashion for Conservation we created to have a conversation. We didn't create Fashion for Conservation to say, this is the way you should dress, this is the way you should do eco-fashion. We created Fashion for Conservation to have a conversation about between people and get people thinking. Fashion is a great way to raise awareness because, like I said, it has such a powerful voice to so many people, even who have nothing to do with fashion. And it also gets people's attention who don't normally care. And that was kind of the point, is I was really done with preaching to the choir, because before I worked in fashion, I did a lot of advocacy from protests, very small scale, to, lobbying the White House, doing big talks about environmental stuff, but to environmentalists. And I didn't feel like it was going very far because I was talking to people who already knew what I was talking about. So fashion was a way for me to talk to a new audience. And that was kind of why it interested me. in the beginning. And I think if you can find something like that, whether it's fashion or whether it's food or it's design, whatever you're interested in, if there are people in that sector that aren't really interested in environment, you can still talk to them about it through their own language, right? The language of something else. Oi, COVID, ¿qué pasa? What's up? Sorry, being fussy.
That's okay.
Yeah.
I'm impressed by your multitasking.
Sorry. He's
No, you're fine. You're fine. I wish I could
Awesome.
bounce
It's inspiring. But Ava, I really appreciate what you're talking about the way that your involvement in your work in sort of fashion for conservation is an avenue through which you can reach a group of people that otherwise your advocacy or your work as a kind of an activist wasn't reaching this group of people, but that it opened up a doorway for you to communicate about something that's really important to you to an audience that was differently receptive. And I think that's a really powerful framing of your work, and I really appreciate that a lot.
Thank you. And that's kind of the power of when someone is in two different worlds per se, right? Like if you ever are in a crossroads in your life where you feel like you're between cultures or between anything, between languages, between countries, between career paths, but if you have two different majors that seem unrelated, like that is the beauty of being in two worlds, is being able to communicate being able to be a translator between those two worlds. And because I grew up in the wilderness and then worked in fashion, I was like, wait a minute, there's a big, language gap here and what people care about, what people are doing and how people are living. So what can we do to translate? And that's exactly the beauty of being in two worlds.
Ava, one of the things that I feel like was so amazing, like being a faculty member with you around, was like, oh my gosh, like, where's this student going now? Like, wait, this student is doing what? Like, wait, what? I just remember you like bopping in and out from places around the world and like being engaged in different efforts in different places in different ways. And it was kind of hard to keep track of where you were going to be in a given moment. And I think it's kind of neat to hear a little bit about your story. There's a couple of cool questions coming in here in the chat to follow up with, but let's go to those first. But then, at some point, maybe you can tell us a little bit more about your journey and where you see your life in the next 10 years, because that's kind of just like, I would love to hear from you about where you imagine you going on your trajectory. But before we go there, we're going to share some questions in the chat.
I think you're going to be bouncing that
Sean,
kid for a couple of years. Sure. So we do have a few really interesting questions that are in the chat right now. And of course, I would always encourage the students to ask those questions directly if they feel comfortable doing so. You just go ahead and let us know. But one of the questions that I thought was interesting is in thinking about creativity and sustainability. So this one I think Eli had flagged earlier, which I thought was really interesting, is this idea of whether or not a commitment to sustainability in fashion, is that limiting? Does that stifle creativity, or does it encourage greater creativity? And how? What's that?
Who asked that? Or are you asking that?
No, a student asked it. Who asked that question? Wait, you're muted anyway.
I think Annalise asked
that question. That's a great question.
It's a really good question.
No,
it's a really
no, sorry, question. That was Alexander Green.
Oh, sorry.
Let's just do a test and so you can answer that question yourselves, which is for 30 seconds, think of everything you can in your head that's white. For like 5 seconds, really. Okay, and now if you're wrapping up with that, think of everything you can that's white in a fridge. And now ask yourself which question was easier to come up with answers. Was it easier for you to come up with general things that were white or things that were white in a fridge? And probably for most people, let me know if I'm wrong, but for most people, it was easier to think of things that are white in a fridge. And that's because when we limit ourselves, we are more creative. We can think of things easier. And so sustainability in fashion is a lot easier than thinking about sustainability in life, right? It's just narrowing in on one way of being sustainable, just like, social justice is easier to handle when we think about it in a local context and a global context. I think when we restrain ourselves, we become a lot more creative. And in marketing and design and fashion, every single, creative industry, one of the best ways to create is to create limitations first and work within them. So yeah, I mean, as much as possible, if you can narrow down on limitations and being specific, or if somebody is limiting you to make something quote unquote more difficult, more limited, it's an opportunity for sure.
That's great. I like that exercise. I'm trying to think of everything that's in my fridge right now. But no, I totally appreciate that. That's great. Let's see, Eli, another good question that they came up. I see an interesting one from.
Yeah, I mean,
I
really like this question from Ashley about COVID and being in quarantine, and if that's led you to think anything in the fashion world, to think about things in the fashion world differently, or allowed you some time or space, and maybe not, right? Because I notice you're bouncing a little new addition to your life there that sometimes takes a lot of time, but maybe the pandemic has given you some extra time to think about new projects. So what's on the horizon, and how has COVID impacted that?
Well, beyond the fact that it's just been isolating, depressing, the pandemic, it's a limitation, right? So in terms of fashion and how it's changed fashion, yeah, of course, for all of us, it's changed to what we wear every day to be more cozy and comfortable, even feel, lazy, because what we wear also influences how we feel. So because we're just at home and feeling cozy, we kind of, it's just we get in the habit of that. So of course it's changed fashion a lot. And then when we do virtual events, we kind of care a lot about what we're wearing on the top. But then we wear slippers or bare feet, bottom or whatever. You have crazy, whatever kind of slippers you got, Pokemon slippers, or I don't know. That's just what somebody gave me to wear in their house. I'm staying in here in Lima. Yeah, so I laugh at people's outfits a lot because it's just a combination of like kind of presentable on top and then like weird slippers or socks. It's definitely changed fashion in terms of eco fashion. I would say in general, it's probably made people more sustainable because they probably don't dirty their clothes as much because they're not going out. They're just wearing kind of, at home clothes. But in the long term, I don't really think it has a big impact on sustainability other than just overall making people think better, more carefully about life decisions in general, what they eat, what they wear, what they do. I think being it so forced inward has really made people rethink how they want to live outwardly again. So maybe fashion is a part of that, maybe not. But in terms of projects that COVID has inspired me to do, yeah, it's a question. I spent the first 5 months of quarantine really, really deep in the jungle to try to avoid people and the pandemic, which is not something that everyone was able to do. And since I've lived in Peru, about 4 years ago, I started going to Peru a lot. I've been really into cacao, which is unrelated to fashion, but very related to sustainability. My heart has always been in conservation and sustainability, and fashion is how it was expressed for many years. And Fashion for Conservation is still operating, it's still running, but I'm actually more in a different expression of conservation right now, which is working in the field, growing chocolate sustainably instead of slash and burn agriculture. It's a little bit more on the food system side of things. So I guess my personal answer to that is I've been doing a little less fashion, letting Fashion for Conservation lead itself. It has its team now that's running it. And I've been doing my next venture, which is more in food systems and sustainable cacao and sustainable teas and sustainable products of the jungle. I have a restaurant and bar and product line of artisan stuff and edible stuff from the jungle, which has been my quarantine project. It's way more hands-on. Yeah, COVID project.
Yeah.
I love that answer. I think once we have a passion really clearly defined, doesn't matter what industry you're in, you'll be able to express it, right? It could be fashion, it could be through a restaurant, it could be through architecture, it could be through anything. But if you're really passionate about the environment, whatever you do with that it'll express itself through that. And that's great.
Yeah. Well, it strikes me that those are all very creative expressions as well. So that's good. It's really interesting. So we don't have much time left, and I do have to ask you, Eva, because it was in your bio, and I want to talk about your time as a wilderness survivalist just a little bit with the Discovery Channel. That experience. What prompted you to do that, and was it related to your other efforts in publicizing in environmental and conservation efforts?
I have a press answer and then I have a real answer. So I'll give you the real answer, which is that as an entrepreneur, you do whatever it takes to get your dreams done. And quite frankly, this TV show offered me a lot of money to go on the TV show, and I needed the money to be able to do a Fashion Week show. So the real answer is that I went on TV so that I could fund a Fashion Week show, which was like $30,000, just the deposit, So, and I didn't want to accept sponsorship from the companies that were offering it because they wasn't in integrity with my brand. And I figured going on a survival show would be more in integrity with the brand than accepting money from XYZ companies. So that's the real answer. The press answer is, legally that they invited me to go on a show and I accepted. That's it. I'm not really allowed to say more than that. So that's that. But the reason that became an opportunity is because my dad's a survival trainer. He has a wilderness survival school for all ages, from kids to adults. It's called Primitive Pursuits. It's based in New York, but there's like a sister school right there in Seattle and in Washington. Duval, Washington is a wilderness survival training school, which isn't necessarily for extreme environmentalists. It's people who want to connect more with nature, learn how to track, learn how to build shelters, learn how to make fire from raw materials, just be outdoors. It's really fun. And that's how I grew up. So it was kind of just like an easy way for me to fund something else I care about. But yeah, I came from that, from being and living and working with nature and just wanting to be in that space.
Very cool. I was just curious about it. Thank you for sharing.
Totally. It's not anything I'm like particular. I've actually never even seen the show. Any reality TV show, I'm sorry to burst your bubble if you didn't already know, is very, very scripted and very fake.
What? No.
No. Yeah, I mean, it's any media is just a story. So I've never even seen the show that I was on. I'm not interested in it because I know it was completely far-fetched from what was actually going on. It ended up being a very spiritual experience, to be very, very honest. The survival show was Naked and Afraid, and basically just like starve because the camera crew scares away all your opportunities for hunting. And so I was very, very hungry. And when you starve yourself, you kind of start tripping out. And I was like communicating with the spirits of the jungle over there in the Yucatan. And so it inspired me to be on a spiritual path, which was an interesting twist in the story. And kind of what brought me to Peru is because I was really interested in meditating all of a sudden. And I went and spent some time in India, and then I came to Peru and I'm more interested in like being connected to nature and meditating than fashion all of a sudden. So life has its plan, but that was definitely an unexpected twist for me, going from runways every season to being way more interested in staying in the jungle and staying in nature, which is where I live now, in the jungle of Peru for about 4 years.
And is that where you see yourself being for the next, 10 years? Or I mean, can you
Oh,
think 10 years out? How about 5 years?
Yeah, I could think 10 years, no problem. I think life is a really beautiful patchwork of all your chapters. My chapters have been very extreme so far. I think the next 10 years will be about finding the middle of that pendulum swing. So one side of that pendulum swing being like high fashion, hyper strong, and very, very, very extroverted in all of the world. And then the other side of that pendulum being living deep in the Peruvian Amazon, kind of more savage. In that extreme, I wrote a book called Bare Feet or Stilettos. And once that book comes out, I think I'll do a book tour, and that will make me more extroverted again. So I feel like the next 10 years would be a lot about finding a balance between those two worlds versus living in one extreme or the other. This little one is definitely helping me do that too. He, his whole global family from Seattle to Peru to Europe wants to meet him. So as soon as pandemic is kind of allowing, I'm gonna be traveling some and doing more talks and being more on stages, but then always coming back to my new home base here in Peru. I think the next 10 years will be about finding that balance, or if there is one.
That's great. Well, Ava, I really appreciate you taking the time with us today, and especially I want you to be able to get back to him, because it seems like he wants your attention now, and that's fantastic. And we do really appreciate that you've shared some time with us today.
Yeah,
So
appreciate you guys. And just one more last little thing is, I think that the biggest advice I would have is to go all in and know that life has its chapters. So if you're interested in something, go all in. Take it to the farthest extreme that you can, so that you really explore something and know if you like it or not. Don't be afraid, like, oh, if I enter this, I won't be able to do that. It's like, life is so flexible if you want it to be. So like, really explore your interests and know that you can do something else later on. That's the great thing about the age and the time and the world that we live in, is it's very, very global and very accessible.
great. Thank you for that advice. Well, you have a great day, and I would just, everyone, again, a big round of applause, big thank you to you, Ava. For those of you joining us on the live stream, it was a pleasure having you with us as well. Please stay in touch for future events in our seminar series. We will actually be coming back to the seminar in the fall. So please subscribe to our YouTube channel and hit the notifications button.